At 2:14 in the morning, I was halfway through reviewing a batch of October footage when I stopped the playback. The camera was mounted on a cedar at the northern edge of Blackwater Ridge, facing an old game trail that deer used to reach a creek. I had reviewed that camera dozens of times. Nothing about the location was unusual. Deer, raccoons, foxes, the occasional bear. Wind moved branches. Rain blurred the lens. Spiders built webs directly across the sensor. Then frame 18,442 appeared. The timestamp read October 17, 2024, 2 hours 13 minutes and 56 seconds. There was a deer near the left edge of the frame, head lowered toward the trail. Behind it, roughly 60 feet away, stood a person. At first, I assumed it was a hunter. Then I noticed the clothing. The figure was wearing what looked like a dark coat, but the face was completely visible, despite the camera's infrared range. It wasn't bright. It wasn't reflective. It simply looked unnaturally pale against the trees. Another frame. Still there. I went backward. Gone. The figure existed for exactly 3 consecutive frames, covering less than 1 second of recorded time. I checked the camera's trigger settings. 8. Second recovery interval. 3. Frame burst. Everything was normal. What wasn't normal was the face. I had seen it before. If you've ever reviewed trail, camera footage yourself, tell me in the comments whether you've ever found something you couldn't explain. Because when I opened the older archive, I found a date that made those 3 frames much harder to dismiss. I have been reviewing wildlife camera footage professionally for 11 years. Most people imagine the job involves watching animals all day. It doesn't. Most of the work is sorting through hours of nothing. A single camera can produce hundreds of thousands of frames in a season. My job is to identify movement, classify species, flag unusual behavior, and separate genuine events from camera errors. Over time, you learn what ordinary looks like. A raccoon walking directly toward a lens looks enormous. A deer passing too close can trigger the infrared sensor and create a white blur. Rain creates horizontal streaks. Fog can make distant trees appear like people. A spider web can look like a cable hanging through the center of the image. Temperature changes can also produce false triggers, especially after sunset. I learned most of that during my first year, when I worked part-time for a private wildlife survey company in Pennsylvania. We monitored cameras across several hundred acres, replacing batteries, collecting memory cards, and documenting animal activity. The work eventually became archival. Hunting properties began sending us years of footage, asking us to organize it by location, season, species, and unusual events. That was how Blackwater Ridge came into my workload. The property owner had been using cameras there since 2008. The files were poorly organized, but the equipment records were surprisingly complete. Camera locations were marked on old survey maps. Replacement dates were written in maintenance logs. Even the original memory card labels had survived. That mattered because I trusted the records. If a strange image appeared, I could usually determine whether the camera had malfunctioned. So when I returned to the October 2024 footage, I wasn't frightened. I was interested. I opened the file from October 17, 2013. The camera was pointing at the same trail. The timestamp appeared. Then the first familiar face entered the frame. The 2013 file was recorded on a camera that had been installed 9 days before the footage began. That eliminated one possibility immediately. The camera hadn't been sitting there for years. At 1 hour 47 minutes and 22 seconds on October 17, 2013, the sensor triggered. 3 frames followed. The first showed a fox crossing the trail. The second showed the fox 2 feet farther forward. Behind it, between 2 trees, was the same pale face. The third frame showed the fox continuing forward. The face was gone. I checked the image dimensions, exposure, infrared activation, and trigger delay. Nothing suggested manipulation. The camera was an older model, but its internal clock had been calibrated during installation. There was one difference between this footage and the 2024 recording. The figure was farther away in 2013. I measured the visible tree spacing against the original site map, and estimated the face was approximately 83 feet from the camera. In 2024, it was closer to 60 feet. That could have meant absolutely nothing. Perspective changes when vegetation grows. Cameras get mounted at different heights. Trails shift. So I treated the two images as separate anomalies. I created a folder labeled Review. Then I searched for October 17th across the entire Blackwater archive. There were 12 cameras. Only 2 had footage from that date in both years. The second camera was positioned roughly 412 feet east of the first. At 1 hour 49 minutes and 3 seconds, 2 minutes after the first camera triggered, it captured a deer moving through the frame. Nothing unusual. Then I enlarged the background. Between 2 branches, almost hidden by darkness, was a vertical shape. It wasn't a face this time. It looked like the side of a head. I counted the pixels manually. The visible shape occupied 27 vertical pixels. And unlike the first camera, this one was facing away from the trail. Which meant, whatever stood there wasn't simply crossing the path. It had been looking toward the camera. The second camera should have settled the matter. Instead, it created another problem. I moved to footage from October 17, 2018. 5 years separated the recordings. Different camera. Different mounting bracket. Different memory card. The property records showed that the original camera had been removed in 2016 after water damage. At 1 hour 48 minutes and 59 seconds, the eastern camera triggered. A rabbit crossed the lower right corner. 4 frames later, something appeared behind it. This time, there was no face. There was a red scarf. It hung from the branch of a small maple tree beside the trail. I paused the frame and checked the surrounding sequence. The scarf wasn't visible before the rabbit appeared. It wasn't visible afterward. It existed in exactly 1 frame. That bothered me less than the location. The maple tree had been cut down in 2015. I verified it against a maintenance photograph. The stump was visible 20 yards beyond the trail, where the tree had once stood. I assumed the image had been mislabeled. That was the obvious explanation. So I checked the camera's file structure. The image belonged exactly where it was supposed to belong. There was no missing sequence number. No corrupted file. No evidence of a copied image. The metadata showed the photograph had been created at 1 hour 49 minutes and 11 seconds. The camera clock was 11 seconds slow, according to the maintenance log. Everything was internally consistent, except for the tree. I called the property manager and asked if the old maple had somehow been left standing. He laughed and told me it couldn't have been. He remembered cutting it himself. Then he asked why I cared. I didn't tell him about the face. Instead, I asked another question. What used to be behind that maple? He went quiet. After a few seconds, he said there had been an old hunting blind there. It had been removed in 2009. The date caught my attention. Because the first camera archive began in October 2009. I stopped looking at individual images. Instead, I built a spreadsheet. Camera location. Date. Time. Trigger number. Visible anomaly. Distance from trail. That was when the pattern became measurable. The face appeared on October 17th in 2013 and 2024. The profile appeared on October 17th in 2013. The red scarf appeared on October 17th, 2018. Every anomaly occurred within a 12-minute window between 1:47 and 1:59. That was too narrow to ignore. I calculated the intervals. 2013 to 2018. 5 years. 2018 to 2024. 6 years. The dates were not perfectly periodic, but the location was. Every anomaly occurred within 146 feet of the original hunting blind. I pulled up the property survey. The blind had stood beside a small clearing overlooking the creek. The cameras had been moved several times over the years, but every strange frame fell inside the same approximate circle. I marked the positions on a printed map. Every anomaly occurred within 146 feet of the original hunting blind. I pulled up the property survey. The blind had stood beside a small clearing overlooking the creek. The cameras had been moved several times over the years, but every strange frame fell inside the same approximate circle. I marked the positions on a printed map. Then I noticed something I hadn't expected. The distance between the 2013 camera and the 2024 camera was 23 feet. October 17th. That wasn't proof of anything. But it was the first detail I found that seemed deliberately placed. I sent the image to my coworker Daniel without explanation. His response arrived 9 minutes later. He asked me one question. Why is there a shadow behind the camera? Daniel had worked with me for 6 years. He specialized in camera diagnostics. If an image had a strange reflection, lens flare, exposure problem, or timing error, he was the person I called. I sent him the original files. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked me to send the complete 3-frame sequences, rather than the enlarged stills. I did. 20 minutes later, he called. His first question was about the shadow. I told him I hadn't noticed it until he pointed it out. He said it appeared in the 2018 image, directly below the camera's estimated position. That was impossible for a simple reason. The camera was mounted 12 feet above the ground. The shadow was shaped like a person standing directly beneath it. Daniel checked the sun data. There was no daylight. The infrared array was active. Infrared illumination doesn't create visible shadows, like sunlight. He then checked the other files. The same dark shape appeared in the 2013 image, not beneath the camera. Behind the tree. He measured its width. Approximately 18 inches at the widest point. That suggested a narrow vertical object, but the outline wasn't stable enough to identify. Then Daniel noticed something else. The cameras were using different infrared wavelengths. The 2013 unit emitted 850 nanometer infrared. The 2018 unit used 940. The 2024 unit also used 940. Yet the pale face appeared brighter in every recording. Daniel told me that shouldn't happen. A reflective object can appear bright under infrared, but human skin doesn't behave consistently across different wavelengths at that distance. I asked whether the image could have been edited. He said there was no evidence of editing. Then he gave me a more useful answer. Whatever you're seeing, he said, it's being recorded by the sensor. That was the first time someone with technical expertise failed to give me a normal explanation. Before hanging up, he asked me to check one thing. The oldest camera file. Not 2013, the original archive. I opened the folder labeled October 2009. There were only 19 usable photographs. The 20th file had been marked corrupted. Its timestamp was October 17, 2009. 1 hour 52 minutes, and 8 seconds. The corrupted file opened on the third attempt. The image was mostly gray. For several seconds, I thought the file was simply damaged beyond recovery. Then I adjusted the contrast. A forest trail emerged. The camera was lower than the later models, mounted approximately 5 feet above the ground. A deer stood near the creek. Behind it was a person. Not a vague shape. A person. The face was visible. It looked exactly like the face from 2013. Same pale forehead. Same dark eye sockets. Same narrow mouth. The image quality was terrible, but the resemblance was unmistakable. I checked the file number. IMG_0019. The maintenance log confirmed the camera had been installed October 9, 2009. The strange image was captured 8 days later. I stared at the timestamp. 1 hour 52 minutes and 8 seconds. That was 6 minutes earlier than the earliest anomaly in the later recordings. The pattern hadn't begun in 2013. It had been there from the beginning. I searched the rest of the 2009 archive. There were 17 usable images after the corrupted file. None showed the figure. Then I found something stranger. The final image in the sequence was taken at 2 hours 1 minute and 14 seconds. The trail was empty. But the camera had triggered. There was no animal. No person. No visible movement. Only a section of the cedar tree where the camera was mounted. I checked the original sensor report. The trigger threshold was set to medium. Temperature difference required for activation. Approximately 4 degrees Celsius. There was no temperature change recorded. Something had caused the camera to fire. I compared the frame to the 2013 footage. The same cedar was visible. A scratch ran vertically along the bark, about 14 inches above the camera bracket. That scratch appeared again in the 2024 recording. The tree hadn't changed position. It had simply grown around the scar. At that point, I stopped thinking about a person walking through the woods. The pattern was older than the equipment, older than my involvement. And if the 2009 image was the beginning of the archive, I needed to know whether the land records contained anything older. There was one folder I hadn't opened. It was labeled with a single word, survey. The survey folder contained property maps, photographs, hunting records, and handwritten notes from the previous owner. Most of it was ordinary. A boundary map from 1998. A photograph of the creek during a drought. A handwritten list of deer sightings. Then I found a photocopy dated September 2008. It showed the old hunting blind. The caption underneath read, "Removed before fall season." I compared the photograph to the trail, camera images. The blind had been built beside the same cedar. That explained why the cameras repeatedly covered the area. But another note was written on the back. Do not leave camera facing north after October. There was no explanation. I called the property manager. He said the note had been written by his father. His father had died years earlier. I asked why the camera couldn't face north. He didn't know. Then he remembered something. In 2008, his father had complained that cameras kept triggering after midnight when nothing was moving. He had eventually stopped using the northern-facing camera. That gave me the first theory I was willing to write down. The anomaly might not be a creature appearing in the woods. It might be connected to the camera itself. More specifically, to the direction the camera was facing. I tested the theory against the archive. Every strange image came from a camera facing within 12 degrees of north. The ordinary footage didn't. That was significant. But it raised a worse question. Why? I searched the survey map for anything north of the cedar. There was an old notation near the creek. Foundation. No building appeared on the modern map. I zoomed into the original survey. The foundation was approximately 91 feet north of the cedar. I asked the property manager about it. He told me there had never been a building there in his lifetime. I found a historical land record from 1962. The property had once contained a small ranger station. The structure was demolished after a fire. The fire report listed one missing person. No remains were recovered. The name was blacked out on the copy, but the date was visible. October 17, 1962. I decided to return to Blackwater Ridge. Not because I expected to find anything. I wanted to verify the camera orientation. If the anomaly depended on direction, I needed measurements from the actual site. I arrived shortly after sunset with 2 cameras, a compass, a rangefinder, and Daniel's spare infrared unit. The northern trail was exactly as it appeared in the archive. The cedar stood beside the creek. The old hunting blind was gone. The foundation was harder to find. I located it at 94 feet north of the cedar, 3 feet farther than the historical survey indicated. The concrete slab was almost completely covered by moss. There was one metal object embedded near the western edge. It looked like part of an old camera mount. I photographed it. Then I noticed a marking. The same number from the 2018 tree. I checked my watch. It was 1:31 in the morning, 20 minutes before the recurring window. I positioned one camera facing north. The second faced south. I set both to identical sensitivity. Then I moved 30 yards away and waited. Nothing happened for 17 minutes. At 1:48, the northern camera triggered. I didn't move. The southern camera remained silent. Another trigger came at 1:49. Then another at 1:52. 3 triggers. I watched the northern camera's indicator light from a distance. It flashed each time. The forest remained still. At 1:57, I heard a branch crack somewhere behind me. I turned. There was nothing visible. I checked the compass. I was standing directly north of the cedar. The position matched the old foundation. I walked back to the camera. The first image showed an empty trail. The second showed a deer. The third showed the cedar. And behind the cedar, almost completely hidden, stood the same pale face. I hadn't seen anyone approach. There were no footsteps, no movement in the undergrowth. I looked at the camera clock. 1 hour 58 minutes and 17 seconds. Then the infrared indicator on the second camera flashed. The southern-facing camera had finally triggered. I opened its screen. The image wasn't facing north, but something had entered from the north side of the frame. The southern camera showed an empty trail. At first, I enlarged the right edge of the frame. Something pale was visible between 2 trees. It wasn't facing the camera, it was facing north, toward the foundation. The timestamp read 1 hour 58 minutes and 19 seconds. 2 seconds separated the northern and southern triggers. I checked the camera logs. Both devices had recorded normal sensor activation. No electrical interference. No clock drift. No corrupted files. I stayed until dawn. Nothing else happened. When the sun came up, I photographed the area from every angle. There were no footprints near either camera. The ground was wet from rain earlier that evening, soft enough to preserve tracks. There were deer tracks, raccoon tracks, my own footprints. Nothing else. I brought the cameras home. Daniel examined the files. He couldn't explain them. The southern camera showed an empty trail. At first, I enlarged the right edge of the frame. Something pale was visible between two trees. It wasn't facing the camera, it was facing north, toward the foundation. The timestamp read 1 hour 58 minutes and 19 seconds. 2 seconds separated the northern and southern triggers. I checked the camera logs. Both devices had recorded normal sensor activation. No electrical interference. No clock drift. No corrupted files. I stayed until dawn. Nothing else happened. When the sun came up, I photographed the area from every angle. There were no footprints near either camera. The ground was wet from rain earlier that evening, soft enough to preserve tracks. There were deer tracks, raccoon tracks, my own footprints. Nothing else. I brought the cameras home. Daniel examined the files. He couldn't explain them. There is one detail I still cannot account for. In the 2009 image, the figure is standing behind the deer. In the 2024 image, the same figure is standing behind the cedar. And in the final photograph from my visit, the figure isn't visible at all, only the 14-pixel mark remains. It appears at the bottom of the frame, facing the camera.